Hey guys, tonight we wade into a war you've probably never lost sleep over until now. Picture this dawn spills over the Korean peninsula in 1950. The air is thick with dew, rice paddies glisten like glass, and somewhere beyond the haze, the quiet hum of trucks turning into tanks echoes across mountain valleys. You duck low in tall, swaying grass, heart rattling in your chest, while tension hums louder than cicadas. One misstep, one word in the wrong language, and it's over. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the mud, your boots sucking against the wet earth like it's trying to keep you there. Somewhere, a radio crackles, but the signal's fuzzy, kind of like everyone's understanding of why this war began in the first place. The Korean War isn't like World War II, which has convenient villains and dramatic endings. It's more like a badly organized group project where half the team doesn't show up and the other half keeps changing the deadline. You're caught in the middle of an ideological tug of war, one where the rope runs straight through the 38th parallel, a line drawn hastily at the end of Noakyowiz that slices Korea in two like a birthday cake no one actually wanted to split. At first, there's this collective shrug. North and South Korea split in 1945, the Soviets occupying the North and the Americans the South, both promising it's temporary. Spoiler alert, it's not. By 1950, the temporary becomes terrifyingly permanent. North Korea, led by the charismatic and eerily stiff Kim Il-sung, thinks now's the time to unify the peninsula by force. South Korea, led by Syngman Rhee, is equally stubborn but lacks the firepower. The invasion begins on June 25th, 1950. North Korean troops pour over the 38th parallel like spilled ink. You run through alleys in Seoul as the city unravels around you, glass shatters, smoke billows, and the terrified cry of a child slices through the morning. It's fast, too fast. Seoul falls in 3 days. Meanwhile, you're one of the unlucky few who knows where Busan is, because you're being pushed there. South Korean forces and the remnants of their American advisors fall back to a small southeast corner of the peninsula, known as the Busan Perimeter. It's not a stronghold, it's a last gasp. And yet, the world reacts. Sort of. Here's the twisty part: the United Nations gets involved. That's right. This isn't just a Korea problem now. It's a global stage. The UN authorizes military intervention. And suddenly, you're standing next to troops from 21 different nations, including Britain, Australia, Ethiopia, and even Colombia. It's the first time the UN flexes its military muscle, and it does so without the USSR blocking it, since they're busy boycotting the Security Council. Oops. You feel the shift politically and literally as General Douglas MacArthur arrives. His ego gets its own tent. He talks like a man who knows he's playing chess with nuclear pieces. And he's already mapping his legendary Incheon landing before your boots even dry. But historians still argue whether this war was inevitable or not. Did Stalin give Kim Il-sung the go-ahead in a vodka-soaked conversation? Did Mao nod approval from a Beijing office lined with war maps and ashtrays? Or did Kim just take initiative, gambling that the U.S. wouldn't bother with a tiny peninsula most Americans couldn't point to on a globe? What's not debated is the utter shock of it. The Cold War, this giant, silent standoff suddenly has real blood. You hunker in a trench, staring down an enemy who looks a lot like you, fights like you, and believes, with soul-crushing certainty, that you are the problem. There's an odd kind of war poetry here. One soldier, a young American from Kansas, scribbles haikus in a soaked notebook. Another, a North Korean conscript, carries a family photo hidden in his boot, the paper warped from sweat and time. And then there's you, listening to the buzz of mosquitoes too stubborn to die, wondering if this war is about anything real or just the ghost of World War II and the shadow of what's coming next. Quirky fact time. Did you know the first American shot fired in the Korean War was from a tank that literally missed Yep on July 5th, 1950? The U.S. 24th Infantry's first contact with North Koreans ended with a bazooka hitting the tank and bouncing off. The war begins not with a bang, but with an awkward plunk. Back home, nobody really understands what's happening. Newsreels show grainy black and white footage of mountains and troops, but the names, the places, they all blur together. Korea isn't Europe. It's not glamorous. It's remote, monsoony, and incredibly inconvenient. American families yawn through dinner while their sons are airlifted into a conflict that doesn't even have the decency to come with a formal declaration of war. Emotionally, you're caught somewhere between adrenaline and disorientation. A young South Korean boy offers you a rice ball, hands trembling. You take it, nod thanks, and try not to think about how his entire village is now rubble. You're told you're here to stop communism, but really, you're here because someone somewhere drew a line, and the mud won't let go of your boots. But as you wipe sweat from your brow and squint toward the misty hills beyond Pusan, a rumor starts to spread something about a daring amphibious landing, about turning the tide, about a general who insists he can win the whole thing with one big gamble. He's right, sort of. You're shivering now, not from fear, though there's plenty of that, but from the bitter cold that snakes down your collar and turns your breath into tiny ghosts. It's November 1950, and you've just been airlifted into the icy mountains of North Korea. The ground crunches beneath your boots like shattered glass, and the air bites with every inhale. You glance at your rifle, wondering if it'll still fire after the oil in it freezes. Spoiler, maybe. Back in Washington, President Truman is staring down an increasingly nightmarish dilemma. His jaw tightens every time the word China appears on a report, which is often, you see, after General MacArthur's brilliant amphibious landing at Incheon. More on that soon. U.S. and UN forces sweep up the peninsula like a broom across a messy floor. Seoul is recaptured, and North Korean forces collapse and retreat. Everyone starts talking about home by Christmas, except you know that never really works out. Instead, you're freezing at the Chosin Reservoir, where 30,000 U.S. and UN troops are surrounded by 120,000 Chinese soldiers who've secretly crossed the Yalu River in waves like winter ghosts. The Chinese aren't exactly subtle. Either they blow bugles before they attack, dozens at once, and the sound is somewhere between a nightmare and a horror movie soundtrack. You flinch the first time you hear it. By the third, you're just tired. Let's pause a moment and really let this sink in. China wasn't even officially in the war yet. Mao Zedong, fresh off his communist victory at home, had warned that if U.S. forces crossed the 38th parallel and pushed north, China would act. MacArthur didn't believe him. He should have. Historians still argue whether Mao sent troops to protect North Korea, defend China's borders, or just because he wanted to throw a punch at the West. Maybe it's all three. What's clear is that the entry of China flips the war on its head and turns MacArthur's home by Christmas into retreat through frozen hell. You stumble through waist-deep snow, feet numb inside boots stuffed with extra socks that barely help. Frost clings to your eyebrows. The Chinese forces don't have winter gear either. By the way, just cotton uniforms and raw determination. That makes it worse, not better. You shoot at shadows. You hear voices in the snow and can't tell if they're enemies or echoes. This is the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, one of the most brutal engagements in U.S. military history. Retreat, hell, says a Marine commander. We're just attacking in a different direction. Gotta love the optimism. And yet, the retreat works. Slowly, painfully, you and your unit break out of the encirclement and fall back south, bringing your wounded with you. Some are carried on stretchers. Some cling to the backs of trucks. Everyone is half starved and half frozen, but they survive. That's the miracle. Well, some do. Meanwhile, back in D.C., Truman is quietly panicking. He's got a general who wants to bomb China, possibly even with nuclear weapons, and an ally Britain trying not to hyperventilate at the idea. MacArthur, for all his brilliance, is increasingly going rogue. He writes letters criticizing the president, gives press interviews with wild quotes, and behaves like he's running his own private war. You sit in a mess hall, warming your hands on a cup of watery coffee, and someone reads aloud. MacArthur says, "We should expand the war." You glance at the newspaper, then at the steaming tin cup in your hands. Expanding the war means maybe you don't go home. Maybe no one does. So Truman does something unthinkable. He fires MacArthur. In April 1951, the man who won the Pacific Theater in W. Sweet Tweets gets dismissed mid-war, like a rebellious employee who finally pushed his boss too far. The public furious. MacArthur gets a hero's welcome when he returns to the U.S., delivering a famous farewell speech to Congress with the line, "Old soldiers never die. They just fade away." Quirky footnote: MacArthur actually thought he might get elected president after that speech. He didn't. But now, you're stuck in a war without a clear ending. The front lines have frozen almost in place, shifting slightly like tectonic plates, just enough to keep you on edge, not enough to win anything. And the weather isn't the only thing freezing. Politically, the U.S. is locking horns with China and the Soviet Union in what's shaping up to be a global staring contest. You're standing in Korea, but the fight feels like it's happening on 3 continents at once. The war has stopped being just about Korea. It's become a proving ground for Cold War ideology. Who can outlast whom? Who will blink first? You lie awake one night in a tent near the 38th parallel. The canvas flaps against the wind, and your breath fogs the inside like a whisper. Somewhere outside, wolves howl, not metaphorical ones, real ones. You wonder why you're here. You wonder why it still matters. But you already know the answer, because this war has become a message. Not to Korea, not even to China, but to every small country on Earth. Choose your allies carefully, because once the great powers get involved, they don't leave quietly. Oh, and just in case things weren't complicated enough, the Soviet Union is secretly flying MiG jets in combat, piloted by Soviet pilots wearing Chinese uniforms. Yep, that's a thing. It's not official, but it's real. You might have already dodged a missile launched by someone from Moscow without even knowing it. The worst part, there's no real war declaration, no decisive battles that win anything, and no end in sight. It's a twilight war, a kind of suspended nightmare. The press back home starts calling it a police action, which sounds a lot like calling a hurricane light drizzle. Still, in the middle of all this chaos, there are moments of awe, like when you see the northern mountains lit by aurora borealis one night. Green ribbons stretch across the sky like glowing silk, completely silent. The war fades for a second. You feel small and somehow okay with it. But that quiet doesn't last. You hear a rustle outside the tent, the metallic click of someone loading a rifle, and remember where you are. And somewhere, back in Seoul, there's talk of taking the city again. Because yes, it's about to change hands. Again. You wake up to the smell of diesel and gunpowder, and that particular kind of morning fog that means either rain or incoming artillery, probably both. The ground near Seoul is still smoldering. You can't tell if the smoke comes from yesterday's shelling or just the city itself burning from the inside out, like it can't decide who it belongs to anymore. You're back where it all started, South Korea's capital, or what's left of it. The back and forth nature of this war is starting to feel like a very violent game of ping pong. Seoul, the unfortunate centerpiece, has already changed hands 4 times. That's right, 4. The city's been invaded, bombed, reclaimed, abandoned, retaken, and shelled into oblivion. And it's only 1951, and now you're part of the force trying to hold it for real this time. Maybe let's rewind just a little. MacArthur's bold amphibious landing at Incheon in September 1950 wasn't just gutsy, it was genius. You remember standing on the deck of a ship, the waves slapping against the hull like impatient hands. As Incheon looms ahead, it's a terrible place for a landing. Narrow channels, extreme tides, sea walls taller than your squad's morale. But MacArthur insisted, and weirdly, it works. You scale the seawall with trembling hands, water squishing in your boots, and plant your feet on North Korean-held soil. In the distance, tanks rumble onto the beaches like steel beetles, and by evening, you're already pushing inland. A few days later, Seoul is back in friendly hands. Sort of. The buildings still standing, some of them. The people tired, shell-shocked. You pass a mother sweeping glass from the stoop of what used to be a bakery. She doesn't look up. A boy offers to shine your boots. You decline, staring down at the blood-spattered leather. Doesn't feel right. Historians still argue whether the Incheon landing actually changed the war or just delayed its inevitable freeze. There's no question It flipped the momentum for a moment, but it also gave MacArthur the confidence to push all the way to the Yalu River. And well, you already know how that turned out. Now, as you crawl through Seoul's bullet-pocked alleyways again, it's deja vu with dirtier fingernails. The North Koreans had taken the city back during China's furious winter offensive. Then, UN forces clawed it away again. It's as if Seoul isn't a capital anymore. It's a prize, a dare, a bruise that everyone keeps punching. The thing is, you start to notice something strange. The soldiers on both sides, they're tired, not just physically, but existentially, like everyone's acting in a play that's long since lost its plot. You cross the Han River on a temporary bridge, the original one having been blown sky high earlier in the war by South Korean forces trying to slow down the North Koreans. No warning was given. Thousands of civilians were trapped on the wrong side. It's one of those tragic moments no one likes to mention, but it happened. Meanwhile, Seoul becomes a city of ghosts and whispers. One day, you patrol through a shopping district, and a man offers you a bowl of soup. The broth is cloudy, but it's hot, and he smiles like it's his job. You take a sip, and for a few minutes, the war feels like it's on pause. Then a shell falls 6 blocks over, and the spell breaks. Quirky detail, someone opens a jazz club here. No kidding. A small underground space near Itaewon where American soldiers go to forget it what year it is. A Korean pianist plays Billie Holiday on a second-hand upright piano, and the room smells like cigarette smoke, rice wine, and hope. The tactical reality, though, is grimmer. The front lines keep shifting north, then south, then north again. Commanders start calling this the Seesaw War, and for good reason. You fight hard to take a hill. You lose 5 friends doing it. Then you give it up the next week because someone drew a different line on a map. You stand on one such hilltop hill, 286. It has no real name, just a number. You wipe grime from your eyes and look down at a battlefield that seems to move in slow motion. The wind carries distant gunfire, and somewhere behind you, a radio plays a crackly broadcast of Louis Armstrong. It's beautiful, it's absurd, and while Seoul is recaptured, you can't help but notice how little that matters now. The war has become something else, less about cities and more about ground, any ground. Hills, ridges, valleys if it's got a name. Someone's probably died trying to take it. If it doesn't, someone probably named it with blood. By this point, civilian life is barely life. You see families living in the skeletons of buildings, grandmothers boiling roots in old helmet shells, children weaving sandals from wire and cloth. One little girl ties a red ribbon around a rifle butt she found in a ditch, then runs off giggling. You want to laugh. You almost do. The soldiers around you start calling it the yo-yo war. It feels accurate. Every inch gained is temporary, every victory conditional. A Marine next to you mutters, "I think my boots know the way back to Seoul by heart." You believe him. Still, moments of wonder find you. One day, you climb a watchtower and watch the sun rise over the Han River. The light hits the water just right, and for a second, the whole world gleams like it's been dipped in honey. You think, this could be over tomorrow. It won't be. Seoul, poor Seoul, will survive, but it won't be the same. Neither will you. You've been here for 3 versions of the same war, and you're starting to forget how it all began. The line between invader and defender, liberator and occupier, gets muddier with every day. You want to go home, but you're not sure where that is anymore. And then one night, under a sky dusted with frost and the dim flicker of aurora borealis again, you hear a new rumor, peace talks, not a treaty, not a victory, but maybe an end. You pull your coat tighter and lean against the wall of a half-demolished church, staring out over a city that won't stay conquered. And somewhere, far away, diplomats light cigars and prepare for a negotiation that will last longer than anyone expects. But not everyone agrees it should happen. Some say the war must continue until someone wins, until the map makes sense again. You sit on a slope outside Panmunjom, the air so still it feels like the sky is holding its breath. It's July 1951, and there's finally movement, not the kind that sends you running for cover, but the kind that involves folding chairs, water pitchers, and cold glances across a long wooden table. The war has entered its slowest, strangest chapter negotiations, which might sound peaceful until you realize just how much arguing it takes to stop a war no one really wanted to start. You aren't fighting now. Not exactly, but you're not resting either. You and thousands of others are locked in the strangest standoff of your life, where bullets still fly, mortars still pound, and soldiers still die, all while diplomats sip tea a few miles away. Talking about peace, you'd laugh, but it's hard to do with chattering teeth. You patrol the edge of what they're calling the demilitarized zone. It's not official yet, but the idea is forming a buffer, a dead space between two Koreas. The irony, it might become one of the most militarized zones in the world. But that comes later. For now, you're watching the horizon, dodging sniper fire, and wondering how peace can take so long. Historians still argue whether either side actually wanted a truce or just used negotiations as a way to buy time, rebuild, and regroup. In public, both claim to want peace. In practice, the talks crawl at a snail's pace with land disputes, prisoner exchanges, and every comma in the documents hotly contested. You remember hearing about one session that lasted 2 minutes, just long enough for everyone to walk in, glare at each other, and leave. Back at camp, soldiers place bets on whether the war will end this year. Most are cynical, a few are hopeful. One guy carves peace or bust into his helmet. You don't ask what he means by bust. Still, something is shifting. Fighting continues, but with a sense of pointlessness that wasn't there before. You dig a foxhole one morning and realize the guy on the other side of the line is probably doing the same. The war's now about posturing, not progress. Every hill taken is a bargaining chip. Every skirmish, a punctuation mark in a sentence no one can finish. You've heard of Hill 355. It's also called Little Gibraltar, one of dozens of hills that trade hands like poker chips, or Pork Chop Hill, named for its shape on a map, not because anyone's getting fed. You help defend one of them. Briefly, you crouch in a trench, ears ringing from shell blasts, mud smeared on your cheeks like war paint. Someone hands you a letter from home. Unopened, you tuck it into your jacket. Later, maybe, here's the thing. No one tells you about war during peace talks. It's somehow worse. The uncertainty eats at you. You're not marching toward anything. You're holding a line that keeps wiggling. Your commander tells you to show strength. You think about what that means when your boots have holes and you haven't slept in 36 hours. And then there's the prisoner issue. One of the most vicious debates in the negotiations is over repatriation, who goes home, and who gets a choice. The North wants all POWs returned. The UN says prisoners should get to decide. The talks stall for months over this. Meanwhile, you're guarding a compound full of captured soldiers. Some look like kids. They stare at you blankly through barbed wire, and you wonder what stories they'll tell if they ever go home. If they have a home, quirky footnote. Some Chinese POWs actually request to be sent to Taiwan instead of back to mainland China. Their reasons vary: politics, fear, maybe just a new start, but it throws a wrench in everything. The North calls it kidnapping. The UN calls it freedom. Neither side backs down. One night, you lie awake and hear a distant lullaby, no joke. A Korean villager sings to her child in a hut nearby, the notes rising like smoke. For a minute, it feels like time reverses, like the peninsula is whole again. Then a flare arcs across the sky, painting everything in harsh white, and the moment shatters. You try to remember why the war started. Something about communism, borders, Truman's doctrine, dominoes. But now, standing in knee-deep mud, it all seems blurry. You don't think in ideologies anymore. You think in rations, rotations, and rumors, like the one that says the truce is almost ready. You roll your eyes. You've heard that before. Still, something's different this time. Behind the scenes, both sides are exhausted. The UN is fielding troops from over a dozen countries, and every week brings more pressure from home. Back in the States, Americans are tuning out the war. Television is booming, and there's only so much interest in grainy newsreel footage of a war that doesn't move. President Eisenhower takes office in 1943 with a campaign promise to end the war. He even visits Korea, in-person boots on the ground, shaking hands, narrowing his eyes at the foggy terrain. It's a PR move, but it works. Talks accelerate. The Soviets, now under new leadership after Stalin's death, seem more flexible. China, too, is less fiery. The pieces begin to fall into place, but the battlefield doesn't wait. You're sent to reinforce a position near the 38th parallel just in case things go south. Again, you huddle in a trench during a thunderstorm, the lightning silhouetting distant figures on the ridge. Are they advancing, retreating ghosts? Hard to say. Your buddy next to you whispers, "This ends soon." Has to. You nod, but you don't believe it yet. Then one day, someone runs into the mess tent shouting, "It's done." Everyone freezes. Forks or Milbite. Radios crackle to life. July 27th, 1953. The armistice is signed. The war is over. Well, not officially. No peace treaty. No parades. Just an armistice, a pause button. But for you, it might as well be a life raft. You walk the DMZ the next morning, where new barbed wire is being rolled out like unwelcome ribbon. The Korean peninsula is still split. Seoul is still battered, but the guns have, mostly, gone silent. You breathe without flinching, and yet, the scars linger. You visit a field hospital and see rows of amputees, some smiling like they've won something. Maybe they have, that night. You finally open the letter in your jacket. The paper is creased, the ink smudged. It's from your little sister. She writes about school, about a dog you don't remember, about waiting for you on the porch. You fold it carefully and place it over your heart. Somewhere in the hills beyond the wire, your former enemies are doing the same, writing letters, digging graves, trying to remember how to live. The war has stopped moving, but it hasn't ended, and the world is already changing because of it. You're finally heading home, but it doesn't feel like victory. You sit on the deck of a transport ship, watching the Korean peninsula shrink into the haze behind you. The sea air is briny and bright, but you're not thinking about the salt on your lips. You're thinking about the silence in your gut, the kind that arrives when a war doesn't end with a bang or a banner, but with a document no one reads aloud and a line across a map no one crosses. It's 1953, and the armistice is official, but peace is more of an idea than a reality. You'll hear people call it the forgotten war someday, as if wars disappear when the shooting stops. But that's the thing you don't forget. You carry it, like a dent in your helmet, or the photo in your wallet that somehow stayed dry through everything. Back in the US, the welcome is muted, not cold, just distant. There's no ticker tape parade, no medals pinned in dramatic ceremonies. People are distracted by baseball, television, Eisenhower's smile, the atomic age blooming like a mushroom cloud on everyone's imagination. Korea is already slipping into the background, overshadowed by World War II's glory and Vietnam's eventual chaos. But here's the twist: the world has changed tremendously because of this war. You notice it in little things at first, like how the Pentagon doesn't downsize the way it did after World War II. Instead, military budgets stay high, troops stay stationed across the globe, and suddenly, police action becomes a term everyone learns to say with a straight face. Historians still argue whether Korea truly marked the beginning of the Cold War's hot chapter. But for you, it's obvious. This wasn't just a fight between North and South. It was the first real battlefield of a much larger ideological showdown. The US and its allies on one side, the Soviet Union and China on the other. Proxy war, they call it. You were the proxy, and that changes everything. The US starts rethinking its role in the world. Containment becomes more than a policy, it's a lifestyle. American troops set up semi-permanent homes in South Korea, Germany, Japan. You see bases become neighborhoods. Barracks turn into housing developments. Kids go to school next to airstrips. The military-industrial complex that term Eisenhower would later warn about starts pulsing to life, quietly, like a second heart. Back home, you try to talk about the war, sometimes, but people don't get it. They ask where Korea is, or worse, if it was worth it. You pause. You think about Seoul's broken skyline. You think about your friend who never opened his can of peaches. You don't answer. Instead, you go to college, GI Bill, night classes, a job during the day, and you notice something funny. A lot of your professors are suddenly obsessed with geopolitics, Soviet expansion, domino theory, Cuba. You're hearing echoes of Korea in every lecture, even when no one says the name. And you're not alone. All over the world, leaders are drawing lines, signing treaties, choosing sides. NATO becomes more assertive. The Warsaw Pact forms. Neutral countries feel pressure from both directions. It's as if the world saw Korea and realized this is the new model. No more grand world wars, just simmering conflicts, fought by someone else, somewhere else. One day, you read in the paper that South Korea is rebuilding fast. American money is pouring in. Japan, too, benefited. Their economy got a jumpstart supplying equipment during the war. It's ironic. The very nations battered by W.T. are now humming with industry. Korea becomes the unexpected spark for Asia's economic miracle, and you helped light it. Still, something gnaws at you. North Korea didn't go away. In fact, it doubled down. Kim Il-sung, still very much in power, is turning the country into a fortress. Bunkers, barbed wire, propaganda so thick you can almost taste it. And on the other side, the South, slowly crawling into democracy, but only after years of authoritarian control and political chaos. You think about the DMZ. You stood there once. Remember, it looked peaceful. Green hills, birdsong, a silence thick as velvet. But beneath the grassland mines, and behind the trees, watchtowers, cameras, soldiers staring through scopes. It's a line you don't cross, ever. And the Cold War loves lines. By the late 1950s, the world has taken Korea's lesson to heart. The U.S. intervenes in Iran, then Guatemala, then Vietnam. Again, each time, someone says, we can't let another Korea happen. Or worse, we have to stop the next Korea. The war becomes both cautionary tale and strategic blueprint. Quirky footnote. In the years following the armistice, a North Korean pilot defects to the South in a Soviet-made MiG jet. It's a big deal. The U.S. gets its hands on the plane, dissects it like a mechanical frog, and uses it to upgrade their own designs. Korea keeps giving, long after the shooting stops, emotionally, though you feel adrift. The war's fading from the headlines. Vietnam starts creeping in. Hippies, protests, color television. Korea becomes the war in black and white, the one sandwiched between the greatest generation and the disillusioned one. But in Korea, oh, they remember. You return, years later, on a visit. The skyline of Seoul stuns you. Neon signs, skyscrapers, bullet trains, students with smartphones. You see a memorial tucked beside a bustling cafe, and for a moment, you feel like a ghost in a city that rose from ashes you helped scatter. A Korean man approaches you, maybe in his 30s. He bows, says thank you in perfect English. He's never known war, not directly, but he knows enough. And standing there, you realize the war didn't disappear. It shaped things, everything, from geopolitics to iPhones, from global defense networks to K-pop's glittery grip on the world. And the best part, most people never see it coming. They talk about the Cold War like it started with Berlin or Cuba or spies in trench coats. But you know better. It started in the hills of Korea, in the trenches outside Seoul, in the frost-bitten fingers of soldiers who didn't have time to wonder about legacies. And it isn't over. Not yet. You take one last look at the city, now alive with color, and board your flight home, somewhere over the Pacific. You glance down at the clouds and wonder how long before that line on the peninsula flares up again, because it's still there, waiting, You wake one morning to a headline so familiar, its eerie tensions rise in Korea, and you think, wait again. You sip your coffee, older now, maybe with a streak of gray in your hair or a back that twinges when it rains. But one thing hasn't changed: that same stubborn border, carved through the Korean peninsula like a scar that refuses to fade. And the weird part? Most people don't even blink at the news anymore. It's just background noise, missile launches, military drills, vague threats from the north, stern statements from the south, rinse and repeat. It's like an awkward family reunion that never ends. But beneath the surface, the tension is very real. You know that because you were there when the line was drawn. And now, decades later, you watch as the children and grandchildren of that war still live in its shadow, whether they realize it or not. You remember the 1976 axe murder incident. Sounds made up, but it's not. 2 American soldiers are hacked to death with axes by North Korean forces in the DMZ over a poplar tree. A tree. That's how fragile the peace is. The U.S. responds by flying in warplanes, bombers, and troops in a show of force so intense they call it Operation Paul Bunyan. The tree. It gets chopped down, under guard from an entire division. Historians still argue whether this moment was the closest we've come to Korea reigniting, at least until the nuclear era. Ah yes, nukes. Let's talk about that. North Korea, once backed by China and the Soviets, slowly morphs into a family-run dictatorship that's both theatrical and terrifying. Kim Il-sung passes the throne to his son, Kim Jong-il, and then his son, Kim Jong-un. That last one, he's got a fondness for missiles, sunglasses, and haircuts that look like they were designed by a 1980s action movie villain. But he's no joke. By the 2000s, North Korea is test-firing nuclear weapons. The world panics. Sanctions pile up. Negotiations begin. Collapse. Repeat. Sometimes it feels like you're living in a global episode of Will They, Won't They? Except instead of dating, the stakes are mutually assured destruction. You sit on your couch, flipping through channels, and catch a news anchor listing missile ranges. Los Angeles, Tokyo, Guam, Seoul, always Seoul. And in that moment, you're back in your foxhole, mud in your boots, heart hammering. Because the war never ended. Remember, just paused. And now the pause button is blinking furiously. Still, the world has changed. The alliances Korea birthed have matured. NATO is stronger. The U.S. and Japan are closer than ever. South Korea, a tech titan, exporting everything from memory chips to megastars. You've seen K-pop videos that cost more to produce than your entire division's budget back in '52. And let's not forget the quirky stuff. In the DMZ, you'll find one of the world's most bizarre tourist destinations. People take day trips to the border. They buy souvenir mugs. They peer through binoculars at North Korean soldiers who sometimes wave. There's even a gift shop. The world's most dangerous border has become Instagrammable. And that's the duality, isn't it? The tension and the absurdity, the beauty and the fear. You watch a South Korean soap opera that includes a character defecting from the North, falling in love. Of course, and it becomes a global sensation. Soft power is real, The war may have stopped bullets, but now it fights through stories, fashion, even food, and underneath it all, the quiet hum of global strategy. China rises, the US recalibrates, Russia looms. Every diplomat, every military planner, every think tank kid fresh out of college, they all factor Korea into their equations. Why? Because it's the template. Everything we've done since 1950 has been shaped by that conflict, from proxy wars in the Middle East to peacekeeping operations in Africa. Korea is the ghost in the doctrine, the first fire of the Cold War, and the one that never quite went out, one emotionally sharp moment. In 2018, the leaders of North and South Korea meet at the border. They shake hands, smile for cameras, step across the line together, then step back. Symbolic, sure, but also gut-wrenching, because it shows how close we could be to resolution and how far we still are. You blink, and it's 2020, a global pandemic. Everyone's wearing masks, washing hands, doom scrolling, and North Korea, it shuts its borders tighter than ever. Almost total isolation, the kind that makes you wonder what's really going on behind those statues and parades. Yet even now, the war's legacy stretches on. You see it in Taiwan's defense strategies, in NATO's Arctic posturing, in India's border tension playbook. The Korean War taught the world a few hard lessons about drawing lines, holding them, and what happens when you build peace on an armistice instead of a treaty. Quirky detail. There's a theory that the DMZ, precisely because no humans live there, has become an accidental nature preserve. Endangered cranes, wild boars, even tigers. Maybe, some scientists argue, it's the most pristine ecosystem on the peninsula, which is deeply poetic and very weird, considering it's also filled with landmines. So now you're here, in a world where teenagers dance to songs from Seoul while satellites track missiles from Pyongyang, where diplomacy and disaster sit on opposite ends of the same table, pretending not to make eye contact. And you, the soldier who once slept beside a rusted rifle, are part of this fabric. You helped shape this strange, beautiful, anxious era. Every time you see a headline about Korea, your heart tightens, not just from fear, but from recognition. You were there. You are there, because this war, forgotten or not, never left. It just changed clothes. The thing about history is it's sticky. It clings to you, to borders, to ideas that never quite finish unfolding. And nowhere is that truer than in the case of Korea. You blink, and it's the 2020s, a decade packed with smart fridges, facial recognition, reusable rockets, and yet that 38th parallel still slices the map like a paper cut through time. You're watching from the comfort of your couch now. Maybe your knees don't work quite like they used to, or you grunt a little every time you get up. But you're still here, and so is Korea, still divided, still dangerous, still eerily silent sometimes in the places where noise should live. But something's shifting. It's not the borders, it's the awareness, because more and more people, scholars especially, are starting to reconsider this forgotten war title. Some now argue it was never forgotten, just strategically ignored, swept aside because it didn't fit the grand narrative. No decisive victory, no unconditional surrender, no Hitler in a bunker, just a draw, a gray zone. And we humans, We're not great with ambiguity. So why does it matter? Now, because every single thing about our modern world, your phone, your passport, your plane ticket, your Netflix recommendations is tethered, in some sneaky way, to that war, to the ripple it created in 1950 that just never stopped expanding. Let's talk about technology. The Korean War was the first major conflict where jet aircraft squared off, where helicopters played a major role in troop movement and medical evacuation, where mobile communication, primitive though it was, gave birth to the very concept of battlefield connectivity. Fast forward to today, and you've got military drones flying with AI brains, soldiers wearing exoskeletons, and missiles launched with pinpoint accuracy from half a world away. But every innovation, every doctrine, traces its roots to those first experiments on frozen Korean hills. Even cybersecurity, arguably the new front line of global conflict, is tangled up in the Korea legacy. North Korea, isolated and under constant sanction, develops one of the most sophisticated hacking units on the planet. They don't need tanks if they can steal crypto and crash systems. It's asymmetric warfare, born from necessity, and it works. But here's the thing that gets you. It's not just soldiers or generals feeling the echo anymore. It's everyone. Try this. You open TikTok, scroll past a 20-second dance clip, and there, boom, there's a South Korean influencer explaining why her grandparents still keep blackout curtains and an emergency radio in their basement. Her voice is bright. The video's got music, but the fear is real. It's inherited. And it lives in a country that technically is still at war. You visit Seoul again, this time with grandkids in tow. They marvel at the sleek subway, the street food, the robotic coffee bars, but you're drawn to a museum exhibit, just a corner really filled with letters written during the war. One of them stops you cold. It's from a nurse to her little brother, describing the snow, the hunger, the screaming in the night. Her handwriting is careful, curved, still youthful despite the horrors. She ends with, "I hope you never have to know this kind of cold." You swallow hard, because you do. And now, that cold is global. Ukraine, Taiwan, the South China Sea. Everywhere you look, nations are rearming, rethinking, remembering. The age of forever peace that people dreamed about after the Berlin Wall fell, that ship has sailed, and the Korean War is one of the earliest blueprints for the new world we've built. A world of posturing, partnerships, and perpetual readiness. Even language changes. You hear terms like gray zone conflict, hybrid warfare, and limited engagement. All that fancy terminology, just a modern gloss on what Korea taught us, that war isn't always loud. Sometimes it simmers. For decades, historians still argue whether Korea was a success or failure, whether holding the line was enough, whether the U.S. should have pushed farther, whether Truman made the right call when he fired MacArthur, whether China's intervention was calculated brilliance or reckless ambition, whether North Korea can ever be trusted. The questions go on, but you don't care about hypotheticals. You care about the legacy, because when you turn on the news and hear about missile tests or sanctions or summits that collapse like a poorly built tent, you don't feel surprise. You feel familiarity, like rewatching a show you know by heart. Except now the stakes are higher, the cast younger, and the weapons a whole lot scarier. Let's end on a quirky detail, shall we? There's a train station in South Korea called Dorasan. It's built to connect Seoul with Pyongyang if reunification ever happens. It's a real place with real tracks, a symbol of hope frozen in anticipation. Tourists visit, they take selfies, but the trains don't run north. Not yet. And that's the kicker. This war, this strange, spectral war, still has an ending that hasn't arrived. And that uncertainty, that unfinished sentence, oh, it defines more than Korea. It defines us, our fears, our diplomacy, our willingness to believe that peace can last, or our habit of preparing for the moment it doesn't. You look out the plane window as you leave Korea for what might be the last time. Below you, the peninsula glows, one half like a neon constellation, the other a black hole of silence, and somewhere between them, always between them, is the line, unmoving but never inactive, waiting. You close your eyes, just for a second, but suddenly, you're back there, boots sinking into frozen soil, gunmetal skies above, your breath a cloud in the bitter Korean air, the sounds, the smells, the crackle of distant fire etched in you like carvings in old bark. And now, here you are, decades later, different boots, different ground, but the echo still hums. Because here's the truth. This war, this forgotten war, didn't just mold Korea. It molded the world. And more intimately, it molded you. You scroll your phone and catch an article, new U.S. Korea Trade Agreement. Signed, or North Korea warns of consequences. Same dance, different steps. And you realize that Korea has become less of a headline and more of a climate, an ambient tension the world breathes like weather. It's not a storm anymore. It's the forecast. Let's rewind, just for a breath, to 1950. You young, raw, perhaps too confident step onto a battlefield that isn't quite yours, but becomes yours anyway. You're fighting a war that isn't declared, under a flag that represents the world. Cold War politics swirl like cigarette smoke in the tent of a general you'll never meet. You think you're just holding a line, but what you're really doing is sketching out the boundaries of a new era. Because Korea, it's where the global game board gets redrawn. And now, that board is everywhere. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. You see the patterns, the doctrine of limited war, coalition operations, counterinsurgency, the balance between boots on the ground and mines in the sky. All of it, born in Korea's valleys and ridges. And don't even get us started on the weapons. You watch military tech reels on YouTube, drones that think for themselves, satellites that see through clouds, railguns, hypersonic missiles, but in the footage, you still catch glimmers of the old war, the trench formations, the recon flights, the coded radio chatter that sounds like it could have come from your own scratchy headset in 1952. History repeats, yes, but sometimes it just echoes loudly enough to shape decisions. And Korea's echo, it's practically orchestral. Now here's a fringe tidbit for you. There's a guy who built a replica of the DMZ in virtual reality. Not for military training, not for art, just to walk it, to feel it, to maybe, for once, be able to cross that line if only digitally. He calls it a peace project, but when asked if he thinks it'll ever be real, he shrugs and says, maybe, but at least this way, We remember, which is funny, considering how often people say the war was forgotten. But what if it wasn't? What if forgetting was just a form of selective remembering, the kind that lets us sleep at night? Because if we really remembered what that war taught us, the trauma, the confusion, the costs that keep echoing, we might not be able to look our modern policies in the eye. So instead, we built over it, layered it with pop culture, trade deals, tech launches, and memes. South Korea becomes the global poster child for soft power BTS, Samsung, Squid Game. North Korea becomes the punchline, the warning, the red button on every Security Council's mind. But underneath the wire's still hot. And maybe that's the lesson we were meant to carry forward. Not the combat, not the generals, not even the ceasefire, but the idea that history never stops vibrating. Every time you hear a siren in Seoul, every time a family divided by war tries to reunite for 30 minutes on a government-controlled video call, every time a missile test triggers world markets, it's a reminder. The war shaped us, not because of how it ended, but because it didn't. So now, as we wind down, you ease into a slower breath. You feel it, the weight of history. Yes, but also the strange serenity that comes with understanding. You know now why the lines on the map matter, why the quietest wars sometimes change the most, why forgetting is never really forgetting. It's just a pause between memories, and in that pause, you find peace, because even if the war never ended, your story did move forward. You grew, the world shifted, and somewhere in the mix of fire and silence, you left your mark, quietly, like footprints in morning frost. The hum of history softens now, like a radio being gently tuned down in the distance. The echoes of boots on snow, of whispers across a DMZ, of old commanders arguing over maps, all of it fades into something lighter, something easier to carry. You picture a quiet field somewhere north of Seoul, the grass tall and swaying, a crane lifting off, wings wide and slow against the golden sky. No soldiers, no fences, just the air, clean and still. And for a moment, you believe it that peace could grow there someday. Maybe not soon, but maybe. You stretch your legs under the covers, adjusting your pillow, letting the rhythm of your breath guide you deeper into stillness. The world is always buzzing. Yes, but right now, in this quiet little corner of it, you're allowed to rest. You've walked the length of a war that never finished. You've seen its shadows on new walls, heard its names in new languages, and still, you are here watching, remembering, hoping. Tomorrow, the headlines might blare again, the border might tense, the missiles might flash, or maybe, just maybe, something will bend toward peace. But for now, let it all go. Let the noise dissolve into the night air. Let the past settle like dust on an old uniform. Let the world turn gently without you for a while. Close your eyes, traveler. You've come far. The story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.